whispering asylum. It happened a few years ago, when a group of friends and I decided to explore an abandoned asylum deep in the woods. As the sun set on that ominous evening, we ventured into the dark forest. The asylum, known as St. Agnes Mental Hospital, had a terrifying reputation for housing the most disturbed patients and had been closed for decades. The legend surrounding it only added to the mystique, tales of experimental treatments and unspeakable horrors. As we approached the massive, decaying building, an unsettling feeling washed over us. The air grew colder, and the wind seemed to whisper secrets from the past. Our flashlights flickered sporadically, casting eerie shadows on the crumbling walls. Front entrance was covered in rusted chains and padlocks, but a side door had been pried open by previous thrill seekers. We cautiously stepped inside, and the smell of decay immediately assaulted our senses. The walls were lined with peeling paint, and the floor was littered with broken glass and debris. As we made our way deeper into the asylum, we started hearing faint, indistinguishable whispers. At first, we brushed it off as our imagination playing tricks on us, but the voices grew louder and more distinct. It was as if the tortured souls of the past were trying to communicate with us. We entered what seemed to be a common area, where tattered chairs and shattered glass littered the floor. Suddenly, we heard a loud crash coming from the hallway, and our hearts pounded in our chests. We turned our flashlights toward the sound, revealing nothing but darkness. That's when we heard it, a blood-curdling scream echoing through the corridors. It was so vivid and terrifying that we couldn't ignore it. Panic set in as we tried to find the source, but the screams seemed to come from all around us. The feeling of being watched intensified. Shadows moved in the corners of our vision, and we could swear we saw figures darting in and out of the darkness. A deep guttural growl echoed from behind us, and we fled in terror, desperately searching for the exit. As we stumbled out of the asylum and back into the forest, the voices and screams faded into the distance. We never looked back, and to this day, we have no explanation for what we experienced that night. St. Agnes Mental Hospital remains a haunting, abandoned relic of a bygone era, and I can't shake the feeling that the tortured souls within still lurk there, waiting to be heard once again. The haunting of the Milltown factory. It was a cold, moonless night when we decided to investigate the Milltown factory, an enormous industrial complex that had been shuttered for decades. The place was an eerie maze of towering brick walls and shattered windows, with a history steeped in tragedy and mysterious disappearances. As we approached the factory, a sense of foreboding washed over us. The silence was deafening, broken only by the sound of our hesitant footsteps on the cracked pavement. Our flashlights pierced the darkness, revealing rusted machinery, broken conveyor belts, and remnants of a once thriving workforce. We made our way deeper into the factory, our breaths visible in the frigid air. It felt as if the building itself was watching us, its presence oppressive and malevolent. We shared nervous glances but pressed on, driven by a morbid curiosity that refused to wane. Suddenly, we heard it, a faint, distant whisper that sent shivers down our spines. It was unintelligible at first, but it grew steadily louder, as if beckoning us further into the factory's heart. We hesitated but followed the voice, unable to resist its eerie allure. As we navigated through the labyrinthine corridors, the whispers coalesced into chilling laughter and muffled sobs. We rounded a corner, and our flashlights fell upon a room bathed in an eerie blue light. In the center of the room, an ancient television flickered to life, casting haunting shadows on the walls. The television displayed images of the factory in its heyday, bustling with workers in tattered clothing. Their faces were contorted with anguish, and their eyes bore into our souls. A cold gust of wind swept through the room, extinguishing our flashlights and plunging us into darkness. Panic set in as we fumbled to relight our flashlights. That's when we heard the footsteps, soft but unmistakably approaching. We turned to face the source, and our beams of light revealed a spectral figure, dressed in tattered rags, standing mere feet away. The figure's face was a twisted mask of sorrow, and it reached out towards us with spectral hands. We screamed and scrambled to escape, but the factory seemed to shift and change, trapping us in an ever-shifting maze of darkness. Hours passed in a nightmarish blur, and we finally stumbled out of the factory, breathless and terrified. The Milltown factory had not only held the ghosts of its tormented past, but had subjected us to a torment of its own. To this day, I can't forget the haunting laughter and mournful sobs, or the spectral figure that reached out for us in the darkness. The lost girl of the factory. I'm a horror narrator, and I've been to my fair share of abandoned factories. But there's one place that I'll never forget. It was an old textile factory, and it had been abandoned for years. The machinery was rusted and broken. The floors were covered in dust, and the air was thick with the smell of decay. I was with a group of friends, and we were exploring the factory. We had heard stories about it being haunted, but we didn't believe them. We were wrong. We were in the weaving room, and we heard a noise. It sounded like someone was running. We followed the sound to a room at the end of the hall. The door was open, and we could see a figure running away from us. It was a young girl, and she was screaming. We tried to catch her, but she was too fast. She disappeared around a corner, and we never saw her again. We searched the factory, but we couldn't find her. We were starting to get scared. We decided to leave, but as we were walking away, we heard a noise behind us. It sounded like the girl was crying. We turned around, but we couldn't see her. The factory was silent. We didn't know what to do, so we just stood there, listening to the girl cry. After a few minutes, the crying stopped. We never heard it again. We left the factory soon after, and we never went back. I've never been able to forget the sound of that girl's crying. I still think about her sometimes, and I wonder what happened to her. I'll never know for sure, but I have a feeling that she's still out there, somewhere, lost and alone.